She is an actor, a writer, sports commentator on Fox Sports West, quite an accomplished person at this point. But I remember the first time I photographed her, people out there are used to being photographed, so they're much more comfortable than the average person that you grab off the street. But she was just like, okay, what are we gonna do? And I told her, and we made pictures, and I can't say that there's ever been a session that I've done with her that I didn't get something out of it that I absolutely loved. And so when the opportunity to make this picture, I shot this in my living room in LA. And I had the idea, I lit it, I had her get into position, and I just said, close your eyes, please. And she intuitively knew exactly how to place her hands and all this to make it amazing. And I took the picture, and all photographs take work after the fact. So this one doesn't have that much. There's a little bit of retouching, but not much. But now that when I first had it made this size, I put it on the wall in the studio, and I can't hardly stand to look at little prints of it anymore, because it's just not as powerful. It's not as, the presence is not there. She has a presence when you meet her in person, and this gets that across.
It's larger than life.
It is, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And it has also inspired you to print at least one other one large.
Yes.
And do you see yourself continuing in that direction?
I do. This one I have an emotional connection to this, in that we'd known each other for a long time and made a lot of photographs together. And when I see her or talk to her, I think of her as being larger than life. And this matches my impression of her.
You were a photographer in Los Angeles for 20 years. Can you talk a little bit about your career, who you worked for, why did people seek you out?
When I first started, it was all about changing the way that photographers worked. And when digital first began to come into the situation of TV and movie advertising, because people couldn't wait for film to be processed, and they couldn't wait to get contact sheets and go through the contact sheets and all this. So I had worked for some people who wanted to change everything that photographers did, just change it all. And so my deal was to make it fit in what they were doing already, because the last thing they wanted to do was change how they make pictures, So I set everything so that they could do exactly what they do and not feel like there's that much difference. The only thing they're not doing is pulling Polaroids to look at the pictures. They're looking at a computer screen. And that seemed to work out really well. But at the end, when I decided to come back to Indiana, there was no specific reason that dealing with business in LA, it was that I just felt like at the end of 19, I just kind of felt like something wasn't right and something was going to happen. So I sold my house and I put a 90-day escrow on it, just in case I changed my mind or whatever, And I did. I looked at a loft in downtown LA to rent that and stay and get a year lease on it and all that. And then I was just ready to sign the paperwork on the loft and said, okay, so it just felt like something wasn't right. And I called the moving company, had them come pick up all my stuff, and I drove back to Indiana. And I got here 2 weeks before the lockdown started, the COVID lockdown. And I went from talking to tons of people every day to being quarantined in my house. And I'm a very social person, so that was much more difficult on me than probably some people. Some people probably love that. But my life revolves around having conversations with people. So it has been difficult finding enough people to shoot here and to shoot as often as I would like. But the ones that I have been, I feel like they've been quite successful. There's one person that I've shot 7 times. I met her in the middle of 2021, and I've photographed her 7 times since then.
This is Anastasia.
Yes. And by now we kind of have a shorthand between us because, you know, we'll talk about the shoot beforehand and then it'll come together, and her boyfriend Peyton comes and he's always really helpful. So it works. It works really well. I set like four pictures up before they get there, and they're usually about 3 hours, and that's and it works well. You know, I mean, the second large picture is one of her. But other people that I've photographed here, I look for people that I see when I go to eat somewhere. And some people are surprised when you ask them if you can make their picture.
What you just described, I believe, is a transition that you have put yourself through over the past couple of years, beginning right at the beginning of the transition to the pandemic, which has had an effect on us all. And so this transition seems to me to be one from being a photographer that does work for hire to an artist who is making work to discover something about others and about yourself, perhaps?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it is to make the person look good, but I want to feel something when I look at the photograph. And I want viewers to feel something out of some sort of emotion. It has to be, it doesn't have to be like somebody's gonna cry, but just a truthful emotion. And you can have a happy emotion without, you know, having a big toothy smile. You know.
Is that something that you're looking for or something that you see when you ask someone?
Yes, to me, really, how young or old they are, or whether it's a man or a woman, or it's just a sincere presence.
And when you ask them, do they realize they're going to be in for a 3-hour session?
Well, quite often it will be, if it's somebody I haven't photographed before, it could run anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour. You know, I photographed a couple of young ladies that are partners the other day, and I had photographed them at a musical event. And I asked them to just turn to each other and touch noses. And I took like 3 frames, and I had somebody from LA call me and they go, "What's the chance of using this for a movie poster?" And I go, "Really good." But I didn't feel like, I mean, it was shot in really low light, so I wanted to redo it. So I redid it Friday, and I shot 4 different versions of it, and it took like 35 or 40 minutes, you know, and that's the first time either one of them had been in the studio.
And so you're purposefully working in both environments. There are photographs in the show of shoots in Muncie, and then there are also photographs in the show of shoots that you've taken in Los Angeles, and after you had moved to Muncie. So you're traveling back and forth a little bit.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about some of the other photographs in the show that you know, are maybe your favorites, or things that are examples of particular satisfying moments.
Well, there are a couple of photographs in here of 2 gentlemen. One of them was taken in Manchester, England. The other one was taken in London, where I just ran upon them and asked them if I could make their photograph. They both said yes, which I'm very happy about, and I love the images. One was at the Cow pub in London, and our whole crew was there. We had had dinner there, and as we were walking out the door, I saw this guy standing next to the door, and I said, "Hey, you mind if I take your picture?" And he goes, "No, go ahead." He had a top hat on, and he's holding his phone in his hand, and if he didn't have the phone in his hand, you couldn't tell what decade the photograph was taken in. But I love the photograph. And the other photograph was taken in Manchester, and we'd had dinner, and we were walking back to the hotel, and this guy stepped out of the 7-Eleven, and I saw the look he had, and the light that fell on him was more or less perfect. And I said, "Do you mind if I take your picture?" And he goes, "No." I shot 3 frames of it, and I love the picture. I love the picture, and everybody that sees it thinks it's interesting, I think. So those are just things that happen spur of the moment, which it's not street photography, but it can be, I guess, be akin to that.
As a counterpoint to street photography, the lighting seems to be much more of a concern for you.
Well, the lighting is very important. It's very important in all of my images. I feel like it's what helps make the emotion come through, the motivation of the light.
So those are very highly worked images, that what you're talking about there, and that type of working can also happen when you're actually choosing the room to work in, and so I'm referring specifically to a story that you had said at some point in one of our earlier conversations about a shoot where you had rented a hotel room that had windows on all sides of the room, or maybe at least 3 sides?
3 sides, yes.
And so you were able to use that light as it was moving around in the sky, I guess, and you were moving around the room. Had you used that room before?
No, I looked at it was in Los Angeles, and I looked in different hotels to try to find something that I felt like would work. And I found this one, and I looked and I saw this, they called it the panoramic room, and it had 5-foot high windows that went around 3 walls. and the longest wall was almost 50 feet long. So it kind of didn't matter what time of day, you just had to find the part in the wall where the light was at that moment. And yeah, the photograph you're talking about was this model. Her name is Fatima, and I wanted to get just the way she was positioned with the light just kind of carved across the wall, and I wanted her foot sticking out in the bottom so it was exposed properly, and her face, and the rest of her is in shadow. And it was worth the wait, because I had rented the room for 4 days, and the first day I did nothing but sit and watch light and make sure that it was going to come here, it was going to be here, you know. And so I timed everything on the shoot so that at 2:30 in the afternoon we'd be here, at 3 o'clock we'd be over here, you know, and it was amazing. I mean, I had everywhere from hard light coming through to very soft light, and 2 of the images are in this show. But an extremely successful shoot.
So you knew what you were after kind of before you got started with the shoot, I guess. Do you have pictures in your mind before you start a shoot?
I do, depending on the person I'm photographing. If I feel like they're going to need a little more inspiration, then I'll put together a Pinterest board or something like that and show that to them. Say, this shot, I'd like for you to kind of do something like this. I don't copy images. They're just for inspiration. Maybe it's a pose, or maybe it's a way the hair is thrown to one side or the other.
What was it about her that made her right for this shoot?
I think part of it is her other vocation. She models, that's part of her living, and she's also a life coach. And I felt really comfortable with her person just from seeing her pictures and seeing what she had to say in her profile. And it was, we follow each other on Instagram now and send messages back and forth. And, I'm happy to say that a lot of these things end up being friendships.
Can you talk about some of the other people that you were photographing?
Well, there's one actor that's had it was quite successful, that's in the show. His name is Tone Bell. He's had, I think, 2 sitcoms, and he was Billie Holiday's husband in the U.S. versus Billie Holiday, and he's a comedian and does worldwide tours. But a really great guy. The image that is in the show is one I approached him with the idea. I want, because he was working on the Billie Holiday film when we made the photograph. So his hair was coiffed in a certain manner. And I said, I want you to be a 2020, well, it would have been 2019 when I made the photo. I want you to be 2019 Malcolm X. And his glasses, he had just gotten new glasses, and that's what gave me the idea. I ran into him and I go, Tone, those are great glasses. We need to make a photograph of this. And he did, and the whole shoot didn't take but 15 minutes, maybe. I probably shot 50 or 70 frames. But I prepared for it for a good bit. You know, I'd had a stand-in and had all the lights set and all this so that when he walked in, all he had to do was step in and start making pictures. And Darren, who's a musician, let's see. I have another photographer in here, Jimmy Crippen. He's from London. We just have first names on the plaques on the wall, but everybody knows Jimmy as Jimmy Crippen, so I can't leave his last name out. Amazing guy, and shot on the same night as the gentleman in Manchester. And we were having dinner, and there was this basket light hanging over the table. And there was just these few little specks of light on his face. So I photographed it just like it was. And all of this has happened since Leica has this camera that's called a monochrome. And if I had to say there was and I kind of don't matter, it doesn't matter to me what kind of camera anybody has. You can make beautiful pictures out of whatever it is. But this one speaks, it's like it was made to speak my voice. So many of the photographs here are made with that. In fact, they're all black and white in the show except for one that sits right in the middle, it's color. And I had just started using it when we were in Manchester, so and I was carrying it everywhere with me all the time. So if it had been normal, I'd have had my iPhone in my back pocket, and if I saw something like that, I'd pulled my iPhone out and taken a picture. But thankfully, I had a camera that would allow me to make these photographs.
The model in the color photograph is someone you've spoken about as being quite fond of, and there's 2 photographs of her at least, I think, in the show.
Yeah, there are 2. Chanel, yes, Chanel Brown. She knew somebody that I knew, and I ran into her while talking with this other person, and I said, "Why don't you let me take your picture?" And she goes, "Okay." And she's fearless. She was in Navy. She was in the Navy on a aircraft carrier. Then she'd talk about them jumping off one of the decks and swimming in the ocean and things like that. And just an amazing personality. When I met her, she was still going to school, and now she's an actor. But it was the contrast. It's the first thing I saw the first time I met her. Was she had a blonde afro, and it was just. Really striking. But the photograph one of the photographs that's in the show is black and white, and she has this really intense look on her face. And I love that photograph, but the one that has color in it, I used a projector so that she's kind of in a profile, and I used a projector so that only one eye was lit. And that's the only thing that shows color. The rest of the image is so far down on the exposure scale that it looks black and white. So you see that I can't wait to see what people see it amongst all the other black and white pictures and see what they notice about it or say about it.
Was there something about her that made you choose a little bit of color in there?
Well, I think some things happen by perchance. There was a gentleman that's a photo assistant in LA, and he was taking these lights that were normally used for stage lights and altering them so we could put our strobes in them. And I had just purchased one from him and not used it on anything. And I was testing it and all of that, and so Chanel came in and I made this photograph, and I was so pleased with it that I don't use it. I have 2 of them now, and I don't use them all the time, but because they're, to me, it could be overdone. So it has to be something special to use those on them. And it's kind of, it kind of inspires me the same way that Paolo Reversi, who's an Italian photographer, lights his images. That's kind of the way he does it, only he's been doing it forever. And he would shoot everything on 8x10 Polaroid and use these projectors with continuous light. So he'd get a little blur here and a little blur there. I do that sometimes, but not as a rip-off of his work. This is mostly fashion.
Let's talk about Erica again for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You've got 2 images of her in the show, the one that you're standing next to, and then there's another one. You've had a wonderful, it seems, personal and professional relationship with her, and you have described her as someone who will be very accepting of the kinds of things that you want to get out of the photograph, including wearing that really large wig that's in the photograph next to you there. And it surprised me when you said that that's a wig, because it looks so natural and right for her. Mm-hmm. How did it come about that you thought that it was right for her to wear that in a shoot that produced this picture?
I asked her to make photographs and we set a date. And by this time we'd been known each other for like 5 years. And she showed up with it. And I probably photographed her in it 3 or 4 times. And every time I photographed her after this time, she's chopped a little bit of it off, you know, to make it different. And it's pretty great. But the other one of her, I was shooting, she was working on this pilot called Posers, and she was one of the writers and of the show. And so I rented a studio in downtown LA and I shot the 6 characters in it for her. And before I said, I need you to bring a white dress with you. You know, bring everything you're going to use for the show, because she was also acting in the show. And she brought this white dress, and the contrast of the white walls with a concrete, darker gray concrete floor, and her dark skin, and it just made an exceptional photograph. It was another one of those kismet things, you know. You can only try to get the right components together, but sometimes when they do come together, they're pretty spectacular.
Let's talk about your history a little bit, and tell us about your connection to Indiana, this part of Indiana specifically.
Well, I grew up in Albany, which is about 15 miles from Muncie, small town of about 2,000. That's about what it was when I was growing up. I don't know what it is now. But went to school there until I was through my sophomore year in high school, and then I went to Delta, which was what I call them, conglomeration of several other small high schools. But that makes me think about how I got into photography. I must have been 12 years old or somewhere around there. I sold Christmas cards one summer. We'd go house to house, and the company would imprint the family's name on the Christmas cards. They would order it and pay for it. I would send the money in and with the orders and all that. And at the end of the summer, I got to choose a prize from this catalog. And I chose a Kodak 110 pocket Instamatic camera. And that kind of sealed the deal with me on photography. And it's been something that I've just been obsessed with ever since then.
So there was a pretty big gap between getting the 110 and then your more adult years when you were, maybe going to Ball State and also working at Jack's Camera, which is right across the street from us here. Tell us about the influence or how did you become connected to Jack's, and what was that influence?
Well, when I was going to college, that was the place you went to get everything that you needed. Chemicals, paper, cameras, everything. Because I was taking photography as my main thrust and business as my secondary, minor. So I would go in there all the time and became friends with some people that worked there. And then I worked there through quite a bit of my college. Then I started working as a photographer in Indianapolis, and that was okay. I was looking for something a little more up to date than what we were doing there. And Mike Powell, the gentleman that owns Jack's Camera, he said, well, why don't you come back and work for us, and you can handle all the professional accounts. And I go, okay, that sounds good. And I did that for 12 years, and before I moved to LA. And it was amazing. I mean, Mike is a great guy, and I credit him and Frank Ockenfels III for teaching me how to treat people and how to just how to be a business person and how to handle yourself when things are going right or going wrong, either way. And those are lessons that I learned from them that I hope that I can pass them along to somebody.